This is a demo of a QuerySurge demo. The idea is to give you experience in how we like to demo QuerySurge, so we're going to go through all of the key points that we like to make and make some side comments as well. Typically, when we start, we like to point out that when you log into QuerySurge, you come to the Widget Dashboard. The idea of the Widget Dashboard is to give you individual slices of the QuerySurge project that are customizable. So, for example, if you want to see scenario outcomes in real time, you can see them for all of your scenarios as we've got in the lower left. Or if you're just interested in the last scenario run, you can see that summarized in the upper right. Now, the widget in the upper left is a special widget. That's the QuerySurge launcher. It shows and gives access to the QuerySurge workflow, so you can see that the workflow runs from design through scheduling through a real-time run dashboard and into reporting. The administrative view is not really part of the daily workflow, but it's where you do all of the standard administrative tasks like user setup, connection setup, data management, and so forth. Let's jump in and look at the design library. You can go in through the grid, and we're going to go in and look at our query pairs section. You can get there from the grid or from the tree on the left. A query pair is our name for a test. A query pair is the QuerySurge name for a data test. And as you'll see, a query pair is exactly that. It's a pair of queries that are designed to go and look at 2 points in your architecture for purposes of bringing data back and testing it. And I've opened up a query pair. You can see that there's a source and a target query. Important to mention is the fact that the terms in QuerySurge source and target are completely flexible. The user assigns the source and the user assigns the target. Let me illustrate and also underscore the broad range of technologies that we can connect to just by looking at what we've got set up in this demo instance. So you can see we've got a number of different databases here, including Oracle databases, Netezza, Teradata, Vertica. We've got Hive and Hadoop. We've got a number of flat file connections, XML connections, etc. And not only is the broad range of technologies important to note, but also that both source and target have the same list of technologies, and you can combine them in any order, any combination. To be very clear, this is not a complete list of what you can connect to. You should be able to connect to pretty much anything that is JDBC compliant. Let's talk for a moment about where query pairs come from. In general, in talking to and surveying members of the broad data community, we've come to understand that typically the large majority of mappings are straight pass-through mappings, that is, mappings with no transformations, maybe something over 2/3. And so what we wanted to do is support productivity in creation of the larger number of pass-through mappings, as well as support creation of the more elaborate query pairs that would be required to test the more elaborate mappings. Let's start out with looking at how we support the creation of the query pairs to test that larger fraction of straight pass-through mappings. That's done with the QuerySurge Query Wizard. And the Query Wizard starts out with having the user choose two connections on which to work. We're going to use the Oracle Sales connection and the Oracle Data Warehouse connection. Just as a side note, there's no guarantee that any of the other connections will have proper data to be able to do this. Once you've chosen your connections, you then come to the choice of comparison type. There are 3 comparison types: column level, table level, and row count. We're going to look at column level because that's the most elaborate, but table level gives you a straight select star type of query pair that's good for data migration projects. And row count comparison type gives you a select count star, which is good for generating quick row count types of tests. As I said, we're going to show the column level comparison. And once you make that choice, you choose the schema that are involved. In this example, we use the sales schema and the data warehouse schema. And next we come to the point in the wizard where the real work begins, because as you can see, we've got a list of source tables from the source schema that we chose, and a list of target tables from the target schema that we chose. Our next step is to do a little bit of filtering, because our databases, like many databases, have lots of tables. So I'm just going to do some filtering on the table names. We use orders to filter on the source tables and purchase to filter on the target tables. And I'm going to drag the sales.orders table over the dw.purchase table. And that drag and drop, as you can see, does two things. One is that it generates in the lower part of the wizard simple select star query pairs for both source and target. In addition to that, it populates the source and target column listings. So I could stop here if I wanted to and just say my select star query pair. But if I want to get more elaborate, all I have to do is specify column relationships based on my knowledge of the mappings. And as I do that, we can see that now the source and target queries are no longer select star queries. They are queries that have specified columns in them. Now, we can go further than that and do some filtering, in other words, auto-generate a where clause. And let's say we want to generate a where clause that will filter the data to include data after a certain date. All I have to do is specify exactly what I want in my filter, and you can see a where clause has been generated. We're going to do the same thing now for targets so that we get the same kind of filtering going on in the target query as we have in the source query. And now I've got an equivalently filtered pair of queries for this test. There's one more thing that we can do, and that is some sorting. So if I wanted to sort on a specific column, and for illustration here I'll just choose a descending sort, you can see we've created a descending order by on the source side, and likewise we can do the same thing on the target side. Now we've got a parallel set of queries for this query pair. And the idea here, as you can see, is that a team member who has good data knowledge and good business rule knowledge but doesn't necessarily have a lot of SQL experience can, with relatively brief training, learn to use the query wizard to generate that larger fraction of straight pass-through query pairs. Let's talk for a brief moment now about more elaborate tests. And of course, what you see in the example that we have in front of us is a SQL Server versus an Oracle test going at two different points in the architecture. And clearly somebody with not only data knowledge and business rule knowledge, but also with some SQL knowledge, has written these queries. And that's pretty much what you'll need to do for your more elaborate tests. In our experience, businesses implement many quote-unquote standard kinds of transformation tests in slightly or even significantly different ways. And our decision in terms of design of QuerySurge was to give you the tools of your SQL and get out of your way so that you can do the job that you need to do. Let's move on and talk about scheduling. And in order to see how QuerySurge lets you schedule tests, we've got to introduce a couple of new terms. One is the idea of a suite. And a suite is simply a collection of query pairs for purposes of execution. So you can see we've got an empty suite here that we just created. If you look on the far right, you can see that we've got our query pair library tree from the design showing. And if we want to populate our suite, all we have to do is drag in the particular folders that we're interested in, or if we want some specific query pairs, we can go and get those individual query pairs and pull them in. And if we want to edit out specific query pairs, that's easy to do. And the general idea here, as you can see, is to be able to easily construct the grouping of query pairs that we want for any specific tests. And it's easy to make our suites directly parallel to our query pair library folders, or to craft a collection of query pairs in a suite that draws from a number of different folders for a specific testing purpose. Once we've got a suite created, we can execute it in a number of different ways. One is just to do a simple one-off execution. We can just run now. Another is to create a scenario. And a scenario is simply a collection of suites for purposes of scheduling. And I'm just going to choose a few suites. And as you can see, all the suites default to running now. If I want to schedule a suite to run later this evening, I can do that using the scheduling feature. And if I want to schedule another one to run in the early hours of what for me is tomorrow, I can do that as well. And I can make any combination of suites and schedules I'd like. And once I save my schedule, QuerySurge will execute it. There's another aspect of scheduling QuerySurge that we should talk about at this moment, and that's what we call event-based scheduling. And that's achieved through QuerySurge's execution API. QuerySurge has an execution API. It is a command line API, so you can drive QuerySurge out of any tool that can access a command line. There are three common use cases for this amongst the usership. One is to drive QuerySurge out of a scheduling tool, whether a commercial scheduler or the Windows scheduler or a Linux cron job. The second is to drive QuerySurge out of a continuous integration setup. If you've implemented continuous integration, then you can call QuerySurge from its command line and make testing part of your automated build system. The third common use case is to drive QuerySurge out of your ETL tool. Pretty much any ETL tool out there can handle a command line, run a leg of the ETL and call into QuerySurge to test that leg, run another leg of the ETL and again call into QuerySurge to test that leg, and that can provide a very powerful tool during ETL development for getting a lot of testing done and getting quick feedback on each build. Now let's do an actual scenario execution. I'm going to cancel out of this scenario that I used to illustrate the features of the scenario scheduler, and I'm going to create a real execution here. And I'm going to add to this all of my Z-City suites. And in this case, I'm going to save it and execute all of these now. And once I've done that, I'm going to go over to our runtime dashboard. And what you can see is that we've got all three of our Z-City suites queued up for execution. One of them is already starting to execute. And I can go in and look at data in real time. Anytime any individual query pair is completed, I can go and look at that data. I don't have to wait till the whole execution is done. You can see that any mismatches in the data are highlighted. You may be wondering why these mismatch, and I'll show you. If you look here, when I highlight in the field viewer the data, you can see that there's an extra space at the end that's been highlighted. If I go and do the same thing on the target side, there's no extra space that's highlighted. So this lets me mention that QuerySurge is sensitive to all the characters, even if they are non-printing characters in a set of data. The other thing that I need to mention to you that's very important is that the only things you can run in this demo instance are the Z-City executions and the XMART executions. Z-City executions will run a little bit faster. XMART will run a little bit slower. That's because underlying the Z-City data are real database tables, whereas underlying the XMART data are files. Well, our executions have finished. Let's just go in and look in a little more detail at some of the data that's here. First of all, if there are failures, you get a failure tab, and that shows the differences between source and target highlighted. I'll also mention that what you can see here is that these failures are marked data failures. Flagging for the red flag as a data failure or with the yellow flag as a non-matching row only can occur if a query pair has a shared key between source and target identified. And keys are set on each query pair in the properties, where you can choose to identify keys either on the source query or on the target query, and the column is identified by alias if there is one or by name. In addition to that, if multiple columns constitute a key that is shared between source and target, you indicate all of the columns that are involved as a comma-separated list, and QuerySurge will use the entire list of columns that you provide as the key. Going back to the execution, when we look at the failures, an important thing to note is that the definition of data failure is that QuerySurge was able to find matching keys for each row in source and target, but that the other columns differed in terms of data. The definition of a non-matching row in QuerySurge is where there was a key that was unique either to source or target. On the Failure tab, you can also look at your queries. You can't edit them here, of course, but you can see source and target. So if you want to look at query and either failure data or actual full result set, you can do that. In addition to that, it's good to be aware that you can export any of this data to an Excel format, a CSV format, or an XML format. And that's helpful for either sharing data with coworkers, or it's also useful for exporting to an external tool from QuerySurge so that you can import it into that tool. Let's go and take a look at some reporting now. The report that we like to show during a demo is our scenario detail report. We'll use the suite that we just ran for our reporting. The scenario detail report starts off with the summary portion before it gets to the detail section of the report. And the summary portion has a number of useful metrics, so we're just going to spend a few minutes talking about some of those metrics before we move on into the detail portion of the report. Let's talk first about the test results section of the report. These are traditional testing metrics, so you can see the total number of tasks, that is query pairs, that we've executed as part of the scenario execution, 52 in this case, 104 queries in other words, and you can also see the number that have failed, and we calculate the pass rate based on that. So in this case we have a 92% pass rate based on tests. In the overview portion of the report we have a number of other key metrics, and these metrics are useful for getting the full picture of what might have gone on during the execution. First of all, we give you the execution time of the scenario. This took a little over 37 seconds to execute. More importantly, QuerySurge keeps a count of verifications. If you think of each of your result sets as being a table in which we compare cell 1-1 in source to cell 1-1 in target, cell 2-1 in source to cell 2-1 in target, and so forth, in this case we had nearly 491,000 verifications. QuerySurge also keeps account of the number of data failures between source and target. It's about 6,750 in this example, and that allows us to calculate the data reliability. Data reliability is the total amount of data coming back from all sources and targets in the scenario execution comparing favorably. So in this case, 98.6% of the data came back comparing favorably, while based on tests we only had a 92% pass rate. Let's go and look at the detail portion of the report, and as you can see when we scroll down we get a full listing of all of the suites in the scenario as well as all of the query pairs in each suite. And along with each query pair, of course, comes some query pair level metrics. Most importantly is the outcome metrics, so you can see exactly what passed, failed, or might have errored out, along with other key metrics like row counts, differences, and failure counts. Now, one of the most important features of this report is that when users look at a report like this, they'll see the failure information, and they'll probably want to know what the underlying data looks like. So that's why our reports give you click-through. All you have to do is click on the report name, and you go back into the Run dashboard, where you can see the underlying data for that pass or failure, and you can immediately start to investigate what might be the source of the pass or failure that you're looking at. So that's our introduction to QuerySurge reporting. I'll just finally mention that you can export any of these reports either as PDF format for sharing out with other users or for perhaps for audit purposes. And in addition to that, we have an Excel option as well. That's generally the path we like to take through the application in our demos. I'd like to now cycle back to the beginning and just talk about some of the data that we have in your demo systems so that you can more easily find specific examples to show to customers who have areas of specific interest. The first thing that I'll mention are the different lineups that we have of different technologies. So we have a number of different traditional database comparisons going on here. For example, Netezza Oracle, Oracle, SQL Server Oracle, Teradata Oracle, and Vertica Teradata. And of course, just to be very clear, one can have any order of any comparison. We've just shown a selection of different comparisons, so there's complete flexibility as to which technology you make into the source technology and which technology you make into the target technology. Now, the other thing I should point out is that we do support a lot of the newer big data types of technologies, and principally we're talking about Hadoop-related technologies, which we support through the Hive service. And so we give you a number of examples here of Hive versus Oracle types of queries. So if you just open up one here, you can see on the source side we've got a Hive query. On the target side we've got an Oracle query. And the data comes back and is compared completely normally, as you would expect. Another type of important question that comes up for which examples are needed pertains to whether QuerySurge handles internationalized data. So we do have one example here of an internationalized query pair in which we use the same query on both the source and the target side, just to illustrate that we can handle with QuerySurge internationalized data. We show a range of different character sets in this query, all of which are street addresses, and the idea is that we have an example here that can demonstrate how QuerySurge handles a broad range of Unicode character sets. Another helpful example might be to look at one of our flat file versus database examples. You can see that we've got a flat file query on the source side, an Oracle query on the target side. The point of this query pair is to show that flat files can be queried by using a standard SQL syntax. The way that happens is that QuerySurge ships with a JDBC driver for flat files so that your flat files, once they're set up, look like database tables to QuerySurge, and you can query them with a very standard full SQL syntax. Similarly, you can set up your XMLs in QuerySurge, and this is done again through a JDBC driver that QuerySurge ships with. The driver makes your XMLs, again with proper setup, look like database tables to QuerySurge, so you can query your XMLs with the same standard SQL syntax that you query your flat files with. Finally, just to underscore a point that we've already made, in this example the source is an XML, the target is a flat file, and just to make it clear that you can do any combination of these that you want, in this example we have the source as an XML and the target as a query against Oracle. So again, mixing and matching in any direction any of the technologies that are supported by QuerySurge, which of course are pretty much all JDBC compliant technologies, is supported and is a powerful way to set up tests. I've saved the most important point for last here, which is to address which of these can you actually run for customers. And the key point that I need to make is that only items in XMart and in ZCity can be executed. Everything else, should you execute it, it will error out. There is no source set up behind it. So only XMart or ZCity has live tables behind it, live data behind it, so that you can execute them. So any of these can be executed, but nothing else other than what is in XMart or ZCity is live and available for execution. So please be aware of that. That's our data tour of QuerySurge, and if you have any comments or questions, feel free to get in touch with us